When we look at the role of women around the globe, in most Western nations, women made many gains during the contemporary era. And so after World War I, most Western nations would grant women the right to vote. And part of that was because of the vital role that women had played during the war, taking jobs in factories and taking over roles that were traditionally reserved for men. And then in Western nations after World War II, for example, in the United States, it would take place kind of in the 60s and 70s, though. We saw significant women's movements as they began to push for equality with men. And the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964 forbid discrimination based on race or gender. And so overall, women have made a lot of gains in most Western nations. We've even seen women enter politics and become heads of companies as well. When we look at the role of women in communist countries, generally, communist states often improved women's legal status. And in places like China and the Soviet Union, women did make some gains under their communist regimes. However, they still haven't achieved full equality. In many other parts of the globe, though, women continue to suffer. And we've seen increases in abuse against women. We've seen many restrictions of women's rights around the globe, especially in parts of Africa and the Middle East. For example, in the Middle East, in some parts of the Middle East, as many as 9 out of 10 women are illiterate. And again, there's been some recent gains, but they still lag far behind men. In India, women tend to be less educated than men as well. In the 1980s, 75% of women in India were illiterate. Now, since 2001, we've seen a shift, and now about 60% of women in India are literate. So there are some gains, but there's still a long way to go. We've also seen increases in abuse against women. For example, in India and Pakistan, we have the dowry deaths. These are basically murders where men will douse their wives in kerosene and set them on fire and blame it on a cooking accident. And that way they get to keep the dowries that were given to them in their marriage, but they are basically murdering their wives in the process. And as many as 6,000 to 25,000 of these so-called dowry deaths take place every year.